he never thought he'd see her again. Especially not like this, in the rain, huddled on the side of a street, with two cold, hungry children wrapped in her arms. On a freezing New York City corner where streetlights barely touched the shadows of despair, Logan Carter, a renowned millionaire, was heading home after a high-profile corporate event. Then he froze. The woman slumped against the wall, hair tangled, coat torn, clutching two trembling little girls, was Emma. The same Emma who once shattered his heart so completely he hadn't let anyone else in since. "Emma, is that really you?" he asked softly, his voice cracking with disbelief. Emma slowly looked up, her eyes brimming with shame and silent pain. "Before we begin the story, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story." Logan Carter wasn't used to stopping for anyone. At 42, he had everything most people could only dream of. A towering penthouse overlooking Central Park, a thriving tech empire bearing his name, and a reputation for being brilliant, ruthless, and completely untouchable. But even kings have ghosts. He sat in the back seat of his Bentley, staring into the cold night as the driver pulled into the gated estate. His mind was still replaying the moment. That moment, on the sidewalk. Her face hadn't changed as much as he thought it would. Weathered, yes, but unmistakable. Emma Blake. The girl who once made high school halls feel like a battlefield. The same girl who laughed when he asked her to prom, who used to walk past him like he didn't exist. And now? She was the one on the sidewalk, clinging to two little girls with rain-matted hair and empty eyes. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt wrecked. Inside the mansion, the contrast was jarring. Polished marble, silent hallways, a long dining table set for one. Logan always had dinner alone. Not because he wanted to, but because there was never anyone left to share it with. He stared at the untouched meal and pushed the plate away. "Turn the car back around," he told his driver. "Now." Back on that street corner, Emma was trying to comfort her daughters with the little strength she'd left. Her coat was soaked through, the hem fraying at the bottom, and her hands trembled from more than just the cold. When Logan's car pulled up again, she didn't lift her eyes, not until she heard his voice. "Leaving you here." She shook her head, her voice a whisper. "I don't want charity, Logan. It's not charity. It's compassion. There's a difference." Emma stood slowly, clutching the girls to her sides. "I don't want to be anyone's burden anymore. I've already taken more than I ever gave." There was a pause, long and weighted. "I'm not doing this out of guilt, Emma," Logan said gently. "I'm doing it because I still remember who you were, before life broke you. And because no child should sleep on the street." That broke something in her. She nodded, barely, and let him open the car door. The ride back was silent. The girls, exhausted, leaned into their mother's shoulders, drifting off to sleep. Emma stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks. Her eyes were dry, but only because she'd run out of tears long ago. Logan watched her through the reflection, the slope of her shoulders, the way she pulled the girls closer even in sleep. He remembered how untouchable she once seemed. Now, she looked like a portrait of loss. Back at the mansion, the warmth was immediate, too immediate. Emma stepped inside, hesitant, as if the walls themselves might reject her. The foyer stretched before her like a cathedral of wealth, each polished surface reminding her how far she'd fallen. "I'll have a room prepared for the girls," Logan said to his housekeeper, then turned to Emma. "You can rest. Everything else can wait." But Emma remained still. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "Why are you doing this? After everything, why?" Logan looked at her. Not the woman soaked and weary, but the girl who once lit up every room without trying. "Because sometimes," he said, "we don't get to rewrite the past, but we do get to change what happens next." Emma swallowed hard, nodding, not because she believed him, but because for the first time in years, she wanted to. The silence inside Logan Carter's mansion had once been comforting, predictable. It was the kind of silence that echoed off high ceilings, bounced along marble floors, and lived between antique walls too pristine to touch. It had been his companion for years, a quiet reminder of the emotional distance he'd built for himself. But lately, the silence was different. Now it carried the sound of laughter from two little girls, footsteps scampering down hallways, the soft thud of toys landing on rugs, whispers before bedtime, questions asked with wide eyes and sticky fingers. Logan never thought he'd welcome such chaos. Yet here he was, listening for it. Emma and the girls had been there for nearly 2 weeks. Initially, she'd resisted staying more than a night. She claimed they'd leave as soon as she found work or shelter. But the truth, one they both knew without saying, was that she had nowhere else to go. The cough she tried to hide had gotten worse. The girls needed proper meals, real warmth, and rest. And Logan, well, Logan didn't need to explain why he kept making excuses for them to stay. He simply did. He noticed everything. The way Emma cringed when she moved too fast. The way she ran her hand protectively over her daughters' heads each night, as if guarding them from a world that had already taken too much. So he helped in the only way he knew how. Quietly. A warm scarf folded neatly on the banister, a kettle whistling on the stove, books with bright colors and soft pages left, by accident, on the table. And once, over breakfast, he asked softly, "Have you ever thought about finishing school? There's a program I know, flexible hours, online classes." Emma gave him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's kind of you, Logan. But those things, they're not for people like me anymore." It wasn't rejection, but it was distance. She spoke to him politely, gratefully, but always with a layer between them, invisible, yet impossible to miss. She never met his gaze for long. She always sat at the far end of the couch. She refused help more often than she accepted it. And when she walked through the house, this house that seemed carved from a life she could no longer imagine, she instinctively pulled at her sleeves, as if trying to hide the worn fabric beneath the elegant glow of chandeliers. One evening, Logan passed the living room on his way to his study. The fire had gone out, and the room was cloaked in dim light. He heard Emma's voice. Soft, tired, honest. She didn't know he was there. "We won't be here much longer," she whispered, her hand stroking Hazel's hair as the child rested in her lap. "People like him, they always leave. They're kind at first, but it never lasts. So don't get used to this, okay? We can't afford to hope." Logan stopped in his tracks. He stood in the hallway, half in shadow, unable to move. Not because he was angry, but because something in him cracked. She didn't say it with bitterness. There was no venom in her voice, only resignation, as if she truly believed that kindness always came with a time limit. He returned to his room that night without saying a word, sat in the dark for a long time. It wasn't just the words that hurt. It was the truth beneath them. Emma didn't trust him, not because of who he was now, but because of everything life had taught her before. The next morning, the house felt colder, though the heat remained on. Logan still made tea, still asked how the girls had slept, still folded the newspaper the way he always did. But Emma noticed the difference. His voice was softer, more measured. His eyes didn't linger like they had before. She sat across from him in silence, stirring a spoon in her cup long after the sugar had dissolved. She couldn't explain why it hurt. That shift in him. After all, wasn't this what she wanted? Distance? Boundaries? But still, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in years. The sting of being misunderstood. And the ache of being the one who caused it. She didn't mean for him to hear what she said, but now that he had, she couldn't take it back. Logan didn't confront her. Not because he wasn't hurt, but because he understood. Emma Blake wasn't pushing him away because she didn't care. She was pushing him away because she cared too much, and didn't believe she was allowed to. He'd spent most of his life chasing success so he'd never feel small again. She'd spent most of hers hiding so she wouldn't be seen at her weakest. Now, here they were. Two broken people in a mansion too big, trying to protect what little they had left. Morning arrived softly, slipping through the tall windows of Logan's mansion like silk. The golden light stretched across the hardwood floors, creeping up velvet curtains and glinting off polished silver. But it wasn't the grandeur of the house that caught Logan's attention. It was the quiet sound of movement downstairs. Gentle, careful, almost guilty. He followed the sound. There, in the grand hallway just beyond the kitchen, Emma knelt on the floor with a rag in hand, scrubbing at a faint stain no one else would have noticed. Her frame was small, too thin beneath the borrowed sweater. Her hair fell forward, hiding most of her face, but her hands moved with focus, firm, quiet strokes, as if this small gesture could repay a debt she believed she owed. She didn't hear him enter. Logan didn't speak. He just stood in the doorway, heart heavy, watching the woman who once lit up an entire room now trying to fade into its corners. Later that day, he found her in the kitchen. The girls had fallen asleep curled on the couch, and Emma sat beside them, her back to the wall, softly humming an old tune. Her voice was thin, like it hadn't been used in a while, but it carried a tenderness that made the air still. He recognized the song, a melody from high school, one of those careless tunes teens sing in hallways and cars without thinking. But the way she sang it now, it wasn't careless at all. It was full of longing, of ache, of memory. Emma didn't notice he was there, until the last note cracked in her throat. "I remember that song," Logan said quietly, leaning against the doorframe. Emma startled. She looked up, embarrassed, brushing a hand over her face like she could hide the vulnerability he'd just witnessed. "I didn't mean for anyone to hear," she murmured. "It just came out." Logan crossed the room slowly, not wanting to startle the stillness. "You don't have to prove anything to me," he said, voice low. "Emma, you're already the strongest person I know." She froze. Those words, simple, quiet, landed like a stone in her chest. She turned her face away, but it was too late. The tears were already falling. "You don't know," she whispered. "You don't know how strong I had to be, just to survive." Her voice broke, not loud but honest, raw. Logan didn't speak. He didn't offer comfort with grand gestures or empty reassurances. Instead, he sat down on the floor beside her, close but not too close, giving her space but letting her know he wasn't going anywhere. That night, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but in the way Emma smiled, just slightly. When Logan brought her a cup of tea, the handle turned just the way she liked. In the way she didn't pull her hand away when their fingers brushed while passing a book. In the way she looked up when he entered the room and didn't look away right after. It was subtle, like the first ray of sun after a long storm. For the first time in weeks, the mansion didn't feel like a place Emma was staying. It felt like a place she might want to stay. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because someone was finally looking at her, and not seeing a burden or a ghost of the past. He saw a woman still fighting to piece herself back together, and that somehow gave her permission to believe she was still worth being seen. It happened on a Tuesday, a day like any other, quiet, steady, even warm. The girls were in the garden chasing butterflies. Emma was folding laundry in the sunroom, humming under her breath. And Logan, he was finally smiling again. That slow, hard-earned kind of smile that comes when a man believes, for the first time in a long time, that maybe, just maybe, he deserves happiness. But peace has a cruel way of shattering without warning. The doorbell rang. Logan opened it without thinking, and froze. Standing there with a smirk that never reached his eyes and a leather jacket too clean for sincerity, was Lucas Hayes, former best friend, former golden boy, former flame of Emma Blake, and the reason Logan once stopped trusting anyone. "Logan?" Lucas drawled, stepping in uninvited. "Still polishing your life until it shines, huh?" His tone was casual, but the way his eyes scanned the hallway, like a predator clocking exits, made Logan's stomach tighten. "What do you want?" Logan asked, voice flat. Lucas smiled, cold. "I want a favor, and don't worry, it's small. Just back out of that Midtown merger." Logan narrowed his eyes. "You're kidding." Lucas leaned in. "Not even close. If you don't, I'll make sure your sweet little charity case becomes headline news." He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen. Logan's heart dropped as images flashed. Blurry but suggestive photos from Emma's past, cropped to twist the truth. Screenshots of old texts, doctored just enough to damage, and a video, cut and spliced, of Emma arguing with someone in a parking lot. Nothing illegal, but messy enough to make any tabloid salivate. She's not just your house guest anymore, is she? Lucas sneered. Would be a shame if the board started questioning your judgment or your personal life. Logan's fists clenched. You're bluffing. Lucas stepped back, smile tightening. Try me. You've got 48 hours. Walk away from the deal, or I start sending files. He left without another word. The front door closed with a soft click, but the silence it left behind screamed. Emma found Logan in his office, staring at the same spot on the floor like it might give him an answer. When he finally told her, everything, her face went pale. No, she whispered. Logan, you can't lose everything you've worked for because of me. It's not your fault. Yes, it is. He's using me to hurt you, and you're letting him. Emma! She backed away, panic rising in her chest like water in a sinking boat. I won't let you protect me like this. I've already destroyed enough lives. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. But Logan saw it. The fear. The shame. The crushing weight of believing she was the problem. That night. She didn't sleep. She sat at the edge of the bed, watching her daughters breathe. And by morning, she was gone. No note on the pillow. Just a letter on the kitchen counter, trembling slightly in Logan's hands. Logan, I never meant to bring danger to your doorstep. You gave us warmth, kindness, and a second chance I didn't believe I deserved. But I can't be the reason you lose everything. I'm taking the girls. We'll be fine. We've survived worse. Please don't look for us. Emma. Logan didn't move. Didn't speak. He just stood there, letter in one hand, coffee still brewing behind him. The house suddenly colder than it had been in months. The sunlight hit the floor, just like the day before. But this time, it didn't feel like morning. It felt like loss. The days after Emma disappeared were a blur. Logan barely slept. He barely ate. He canceled meetings, ignored calls, left everything behind except the one thing that mattered: finding her. The mansion, once filled with the soft footsteps of two little girls and Emma's quiet presence, now echoed with emptiness. Her voice, her laughter, even her silence, gone. And in their place, a paper. Just a single sheet, crumpled slightly, left on the counter like an apology too fragile to say aloud. Logan, you've done too much already. I don't belong in your world. I won't let your kindness cost you everything. Please let me go. E. He read it a dozen times, folded it, unfolded it, pressed it to his chest like it might still be warm. And then, he left. It took 6 days. A friend of the housekeeper had seen someone who looked like Emma at a small bakery outside Westchester. The place was quaint. Brick walls, a chipped blue sign that read, Rose and Crumb. Inside, behind the counter, her. Hair tied back in a loose knot, apron stained with flour. Smiling, but not really. Her eyes were hollow in the way only someone still surviving can be. Logan didn't speak right away. He just watched, until she turned, and froze. Emma, he breathed. Her lips parted, but no words came. Not yet. They stepped outside. It had started to rain, thin, steady drops that soaked the sidewalk and turned the air cold. Logan didn't bring an umbrella. Emma stood beneath the bakery's awning, arms crossed, trying to hide the shaking in her hands. You shouldn't have come, she said quietly. He stepped closer, drenched now, but unmoving. You left without a word. I left because I had to. You didn't have to do anything alone. Emma's eyes brimmed with tears she refused to let fall. I don't belong in your world, Logan. I'm not polished. I'm not graceful. I'm tired. I'm scared. I'm a mess. She swallowed. You deserve someone who can walk beside you, not someone constantly trying to catch up. Rain tapped the pavement between them. Logan shook his head slowly. I never asked you to be perfect, Emma. His voice cracked. I don't need you to be strong all the time. I don't care about who you were or weren't. I care about now. He stepped forward again, eyes locked with hers. I care about the woman who gave up everything for her daughters, who scrubbed my floors at night just to feel useful, who sang lullabies when she thought no one was listening. A pause. The rain got heavier, but neither of them moved. You don't need to be anything more than that, Emma. You just as you are, is all I've ever wanted." She looked at him finally, really looked, and for a heartbeat, he saw it. The flicker of the girl he once knew, the woman she had become, the mother Dot, the fighter Dot, the protector, but also the one who had never truly believed she deserved to be loved. Her lips trembled. Then, without a word, she turned and walked back inside Dot. The door closed behind her. Dot soft. Final. Logan stood there in the pouring rain, hands clenched at his sides, eyes burning. Soaked to the bone. Dot, heart heavier than ever. She hadn't slammed the door, Dot. She hadn't yelled, Dot. But somehow, that silence hurt more than anything. It didn't happen overnight. It took weeks of lawyers, long meetings behind closed doors, and more than a few enemies revealed. But Logan Carter had always been a patient man, especially when it came to protecting the people he loved. And this time it wasn't just business. It was personal. Lucas, the so-called friend, the man who once shared Logan's childhood and stole Emma's heart, had built his empire on manipulation and deceit, threats, doctored screenshots, falsified emails, all of it. Logan uncovered everything. When the scandal broke, it was quiet at first, just whispers in the corner of boardrooms. But within days, Lucas's reputation crumbled like wet paper. His name was removed from deals, his face erased from company websites, and by the end of the month he was left with nothing but an expensive watch and a locked phone filled with unanswered calls. Logan didn't gloat. He didn't even speak to the press. He only sent one email. Emma was closing the shop when she saw it. An unfamiliar address, but a name she hadn't dared to whisper in weeks. Subject: just the truth. She hesitated. Her thumb hovered above the screen, and then she opened it. Emma, I didn't write this expecting anything in return. You don't owe me forgiveness. You don't even owe me a reply. But you do deserve the truth. Attached are the files that prove everything Lucas tried to do, not just to me, but to you. The threats, the lies, the manipulation. You never had to run. You were never the problem. And if you're still afraid, you don't have to be anymore. No matter where you are, no matter what you decide, I'll keep protecting you, because you and the girls, you're my family, whether you believe that or not. Logan. Emma's hands trembled, not just from the words, but from the weight they carried. Her eyes scanned the attachments, timestamps, email headers, even a voice recording of Lucas making threats. It was undeniable. Logan had risked everything, not to win her back, not for revenge, but simply to give her peace. A single tear slid down her cheek, then another. She pressed the phone to her chest as if holding it tighter might somehow hold him. And slowly, for the first time in what felt like years, her lips curved into a smile. Not big, not loud Dot, but real. The rain tapped gently on the window beside her. Outside, the sky had started to clear, but the light wasn't strong yet. It was the kind of light that comes after a storm. Soft, cautious, hopeful. It was a night where the world seemed suspended in time. Snow drifted down in thick, steady flakes, coating everything in white. The trees, the iron gate, the long gravel path leading to Logan Carter's mansion. Even the sharp outlines of the past felt softened by the quiet grace of winter. The wind was gentle, but the cold cut through the layers of Emma's coat as she stepped through the gate with trembling hands and a racing heart. She hadn't been here in weeks, hadn't dared to come back. But something inside her, something stronger than fear, stronger than pride, had brought her here tonight. A longing, a hope. And the memory of a man who said he would love her even if she walked away. The estate loomed ahead, solemn and majestic. But it wasn't the building that made her breath hitch. It was him. Logan was sitting under the wide wooden porch, just beyond the reach of the snow, hunched slightly forward on the steps. His coat was damp from the falling snow. In his large, calloused hands he held a small pink teddy bear, the one Hazel had dropped the night they left. His eyes were red-rimmed, not from the cold. He hadn't moved in a long time. And though the snow blanketed the world in quiet, he had sat there for hours, waiting. Emma's footsteps were hesitant at first, then firmer, more certain as she approached. She stopped just a few feet from him. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the hush of snowfall like thunder. Do you still have space for a single mom and her two little troublemakers? Logan didn't lift his head right away, Dot. He took a breath, Dot, then another. Finally he looked up, his eyes locking with hers. The pain, the longing, the love, all of it lived in that one moment. And then, with a voice heavy with emotion yet impossibly gentle, he said, "That space, it's never been filled." Emma's lips parted, trembling, but she said nothing. Her tears froze before they could fall, mixing with the snowflakes on her cheeks. She dropped her bag, crossed the final distance between them, and Logan stood, slowly, reverently, as if afraid she might vanish again. Then, he opened his arms, Dot. She stepped into them. The world, the snow, the pain, everything disappeared. He held her like he was afraid to breathe, held her like a man who had lost everything once, and now found it standing in front of him again. Emma buried her face in his chest, inhaling the warmth she had missed. His hands ran gently over her back, steadying the quake of her shoulders. "I was so scared," she whispered, her voice muffled. "Scared you'd resent me, hate me." "I never hated you," Logan murmured, pressing his forehead against hers. "I hated the silence. I hated the space where you used to be." The porch light flickered softly behind them. Inside the house, warmth waited. So did two little girls whose dreams were filled with laughter and teddy bears. But out here, in the falling snow, a new chapter was beginning. No grand declarations, no perfect timing. Just the quiet, undeniable truth of two broken hearts choosing to love again. And for the first time in years, Logan smiled. Not the polite smile he gave at boardrooms, not the controlled smile for cameras, but a real one, soft, open, full of hope. Because the woman he loved was home, and she hadn't come back alone. The day was quiet, not grand, not overly decorated, just warm. The kind of day where sunlight slips gently through tall windows and everything feels a little softer, a little slower. Emma stood alone in a quiet room, wearing a simple ivory dress. Not a gown of opulence, but one that whispered grace. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the lace near her collarbone, gazing at her reflection in the long mirror. The woman staring back at her wore more than a dress. She wore years of survival, pain, growth, doubt. Her eyes weren't lit with excitement the way most brides might expect. Instead, they held a question she didn't dare speak aloud. "Am I enough? Will I ruin this too?" Her breath hitched slightly as she remembered all the moments she'd failed herself, failed her daughters, walked away from love because she didn't think she deserved it. Outside, Logan waited under the archway in the garden. No crowd, no spectacle. Just him, a small velvet box in hand, and a bouquet of wildflowers Emma once said reminded her of home. In his pocket was a ring. Old, delicate, filled with stories. It had belonged to his mother, and before she passed, she told him, "This ring is for the woman who makes your heart stop feeling alone." He knew exactly who that woman was. When Emma finally stepped out, the girls ran ahead, laughing in white dresses, holding hands like little angels. And then there she was. She walked slowly, almost uncertainly, as if every step toward happiness still felt like walking across thin ice. But her eyes, when they met Logan's, began to steady. He didn't wait for a speech, didn't kneel, didn't look rehearsed. He simply took her hand, looked into her soul and said, "You're scared. I know. But so am I. We're not perfect. But I choose you. Every scar, every doubt, every ounce of your strength you don't even know you carry." Emma blinked, holding back tears. The wind was soft. Her girls watched from behind Logan, not fully understanding, but sensing that something sacred was unfolding. She whispered, "I've broken everything I've ever touched. My own life, my parents' trust, my dreams. What if I break yours?" "If..." Logan shook his head gently. "You won't. Because you're not broken, Emma. You're rebuilding, and I want to rebuild with you." He opened the box. The ring shimmered, simple, golden, worn with love from another time. It didn't need diamonds. It didn't need grandeur. It needed a promise. Emma looked down at it and then at him, Dot, and with a breathless nod, she said, "Yes." Later that evening, back in the quiet of the house, Emma stood in front of the mirror once more, now with the ring on her hand. She still saw the same woman, Dot, but this time, Beneath the old doubt, she saw something new. Hope. The wedding wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. In the backyard garden of Logan's estate, beneath an arch of hand-picked wildflowers, two hearts finally found their home. Harper and Hope, in matching ivory dresses and messy curls, ran ahead, giggling as they scattered petals across the soft grass. Emma walked down the garden path, sunlight dappling through the trees. Her gown was modest, but her smile, it was luminous. Logan stood waiting, eyes filled with awe not for her beauty, but for the journey they'd taken to get there. The vows were soft, personal. No microphones, no grand speeches, just two voices, tired of pain, ready for peace. 1 year later. The world outside was quiet, but inside the hospital room, time had slowed. Emma sat in bed, a soft blanket draped over her legs, a worn copy of Little Women resting gently on her belly. Her breathing was steady, eyes closed, face serene in the glow of motherhood. Beside her, Logan held her hand, not with nervous energy, but with reverence. He leaned down, his voice a whisper against her temple. This time, I'll be there the moment he takes his first breath. No more goodbyes, no more empty arms. Emma opened her eyes and smiled through tears, because this time, she wasn't alone. The moment came quietly. Like dawn, the baby let out a soft cry. Alive, warm, loved from the very first second. Logan held his son for the first time. Hands that once closed off the world now cradled something impossibly small and infinite. Emma reached for him, and their daughters climbed onto the bed, wrapping around them like ribbons of light. 4 voices, then 5, breathing, laughing, loving. A family. Whole outside snow began to fall again, just like that night they'd first met under the street lamp. But this time, no one was cold. No one was lost. No one was alone. If you've made it this far, comment the word love to show you're a true supporter, someone who believes in second chances and the power of forgiveness. And if you know someone out there who deserves to be loved one more time, share this video with them. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and drop a comment below. What do you think is the most important thing in keeping love alive after it's been broken? We'd love to hear your story.